guys, this is maybe a new name, The Bench Talk. Here with Tim. We have no real direction today. We're just going to be chit-chatting a little bit. So how was your training session right there?
Terrible. We're in a weird AMRAP-y phase where arbitrarily we just pick an AMRAP of some kind and seem to try to die.
Well, who challenged you?
Casey, of course. Come on.
Who else?
Oh, and Rob.
And Rob, yeah. Mr. Rob Earwicker. Heard about his very aggressive 40 kilos for, what was that?
Set of 6 in
Set
the
of
snatch.
6? Ooh, that's rough. What did you end up finishing up at?
I finished with 80 for a set of 6, which was
Got him.
terrible. And 90 for 5. So.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
We'll try it again next week and probably tomorrow and the day after. And eventually stop training.
Yeah, take a break until you die. And so kind of leads us into one of the few things we actually want to talk about was working out versus training. Something like that kind of falls into a little bit of both, right? Like,
yeah. I mean, like, we kind of picked times to do things like that, like around like kind of lower volume training, like we're recovering a little bit, like, or weeks that are not focused on what the objective is.
Yeah.
Like we had a little extra time, we were only doing like power snatches at maybe 60% that day. So kind of spice up the training, accept the challenge, have some fun, you know?
Kind of like less specific, right?
Yes.
So for some of these ball sport guys, maybe like in their off season when they go and mess around and hit lefty for a little bit, like something kind of like that. Less specific, still within the realm.
Right. Well, and as like somebody whose primary focus is to be better at their ball sport, get better in the weight room to get better at their ball sport, like maybe you want to be a little bit more focused, like people who live for fun and stuff like that, like that's totally fine.
Yeah.
It's just about like what the goal actually is. Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish?
Well, and so we get a lot of input from other athletes that have other coaches, right? And some of the things that we kind of notice is they're putting them through workouts, not specific plans to get them better, right? So it's not training, it's more working out. So like, what would you consider like a training plan? Like, give me a generic month of training plan. Like, what would the beginning week look like, the first week of the training?
Or I think like maybe like a better discussion is like, or like more of like a higher level discussion is kind of like, because like you can find like weeks of training on, you know, just about any website or things like that,
yeah,
or whatever you choose to follow. However, like it's more about like getting the tools that you can use to influence your training. You know, because athletes will have coaches in the weight room. They'll have coaches on the ball sport field. What can the athlete do to like have better sessions and not be working out, but actually be training? You know, because like a lot of the programming falls on the coach's shoulders.
Yep.
But for an athlete specifically, it's about being present with your training. And I think what I mean by that is like having kind of a focused outcome to training. Where like, am I going in and like doing snatches and it's like, like I might work on a little bit of this, I might work on a little bit of that, or I'm just kind of going through the motions, just like doing some work for work's sake. Or am I going in and being like, no, I want to focus on my transition into the bottom. I want to focus on things like that. Like, how are you structuring your training days to have the most productive session?
Gotcha. So if you were to walk into the gym and kind of just be like, all right, what do I feel like today? Would you consider that the start of a workout or a training session?
That's the start of like a workout.
Yep, exactly.
For a training session, you should have at least a decent idea of what's going on and where you're at.
Yeah. And do you think it needs to follow, like yesterday I did legs and I felt bad out of the hole, right? The transition from going down, staying strong, and coming out.
In the squat.
And do you have to do that the next day since you're motivated, or it's going to be like, okay, I need to put that off a couple days to let my body recover, and then fill in the gaps where they're needed? Like, okay, maybe I should, because this technique of coming out of the hole is bad, maybe I work on just holding tension in certain positions when I'm doing auxiliary lunges, RDLs, all that kind of stuff. Like, you can apply the idea of whatever the hard to put in words, whatever the stimulus required to get better at the position, you can apply it to other movements, right?
Well, and I think
I mean, one of the main things I'm thinking of right now is like intra-abdominal pressure. There's a lot of kids, and there's a lot of adults too that have a hard time like feeling what that is. So if you're like, oh man, I felt really weak in the squat, and today I have bench press, like still a good time to work on finding intra-abdominal pressure or doing some drills in between sets to like practice that.
Well, and
And it's not taken out of your normal training.
or it's like skills that are like cross-transferable, right?
Yeah.
Where like, yeah, like I say like I go in and as an athlete I notice like, oh man, coming out of the hole of a squat is like really difficult and like I'm having a lot of issue there and things of that nature. So myself as an athlete, if I end up talking to coach and coach is like, you know, it's probably you're not sitting tight enough at the bottom or like you're losing kind of tightness and it's kind of transferring to where it's making it difficult to get out of the bottom, then like as an athlete I need to take it upon myself to be like, okay, I'm going to try to practice this in the squat. I'm going to try to practice this in my deadlifts. I'm going to try to practice this in like my bench presses or like other movements, because even though the overarching goal is like, hey, I want to get better at the squat, it's about being focused on what you need to get better. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's very specific, right? We're talking about that one thing.
Right.
Do you think that having one thing for 3 to 4 weeks until you start to really get a hang of it, can you start really divvying focus to other things? Or do you think you can multitask and have like, okay, intra-abdominal pressure, I also have really bad ankle mobility and my pec minor is really tight, causing me shoulder issues. Can you focus on all of that, or would that kind of start taking away from your overall workload? And
I think it kind of depends.
Yeah.
I think you might be able to knock out like a couple of them, but like to have kind of dedicated focus in a training session, probably having like 6 things to focus on is not going to be very productive or helpful. But having like maybe 1 or 2 things that you really want to hammer and get really good at,
Yeah.
and then you almost might find that like maybe like one of those issues gets way better way fast. Like maybe it gets better in like 2 weeks versus like 3 or 4.
yeah,
Then you can kind of transition and be like, okay, now I'm going to focus on something else.
yeah. There's for me specifically, there's kind of an overarching thing that I always try to like focus on, and one of those is making sure my like shoulders and elbows don't hurt, because I bench a lot, right? But then somebody might be looking at my workload and be like, okay, that looks more like working out. You're doing a ridiculous amount of reps and all that kind of stuff. But if I lay out the plan, then it looks okay to them. So when someone is just working out, like how far do you think they need to look out in front for it to not be working out, but for it to be training? Because if people look at my training, they'll probably be like, he works out a lot and doesn't train as much. But I think I have an overarching plan of like a lot of my stuff requires a lot of time and attention, like chest workouts.
Well, and I think what you're hitting on is like, it also depends on like the training age of the athlete, right?
Yeah.
So like for a beginner, how much like foresight of their, like how far in advance are they planning like training and stuff? For a beginner, it might just be a week where they're like, okay, like I know that coming up in this week, I'm gonna work on this, this, and this. And then prior to the next week, they're like, okay, well, this is how last week's training went. How do I go from here? I think as you kind of start breaking into like intermediate, advanced athletes, be it ball sport athletes or weightlifters or lifters in general, like you end up getting in this place where like, okay, now we need to like look further out, because not only do they require more work, but that more work also requires a more kind of sophisticated planning of rest and recovery.
Yeah, so like kind of at a bare minimum, we're kind of talking about to change from working out for you, basically what you do to be working out to kind of more of a training. It's kind of like at least looking forward to a full 1 week of training, like kind of planning it out.
I would say that would be like the minimum.
The minimum, yeah.
And I think most people like even most people would have the common sense of being like, okay, like yeah, I could plan a week, but why don't I plan 4? Or why don't I do whatnot?
Yeah.
And then you get into discussions about like how does like training programs get structured and things like that. I think at an athlete level though, it's more about intention than it is about like structure. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like I think for coaches and stuff, like structure is important and knowing the structure. But as the athlete, that's their job. You know what I mean? What you can focus on in individual sessions is like making points in the individual sessions that you can actually action and get better at and focus on and things like that. Because what ends up happening is like, I think athletes themselves fall into like a working out category when they lose intention and focus. Meaning that like, a productive training session can quickly turn into working out, if you're not kind of like, if your intention kind of drifts, or you're just going through the motions, or like things like that.
Gotcha. Do you think weird question. All of them are weird, it's okay. The drifting, right? We talked about the drifting. Do you think it's easier for these kids nowadays, or young men nowadays, to get caught up in looking at their phones, Instagram, Twitter, and now all of a sudden, like, even though their sets are fairly aggressive and their percentages are looking smooth and they're young and they're able to kind of adapt to going from this low intensity mid squat session to high intensity where they actually have to get under the bar? Or do you think there is a huge detriment in the fact that they have their cell phone on?
Well, and I think it's kind of two factors. Where like I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody right now that wouldn't make the argument that like, oh yeah, like people as a society as a whole are like way more distracted right now.
Yeah.
Or like, you know, you got notifications going over here, I'm getting emails constantly.
Yeah.
And the gym's kind of no exception. Do I think there should be like a no cell phone rule? I think that's kind of unrealistic, but it's something to be like cognizant of too. So if you're an athlete and you're like, I actually want to get better, like, and there's some that come in and they're like, oh, I just want to do this because my coach says I need to do this.
Because my coach said so.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
And you just got to be realistic with yourself about what you want. But if you actively want to get better, then maybe taking a moment to be like, okay, I can't be on my phone the entire workout or at all. You know what I mean? Because I'm not focused.
Yep.
It's about having like a little bit of kind of self-awareness about the thing.
So I've kind of found this weird happy medium of I can eliminate cell phones without asking for it by doing every minute on the minute type warm-ups. Yep. And that's worked really well, because what I found is if I ask these young athletes to, hey, I need you off your phone, the atmosphere or their attitude or whatever it is dips on it anyway. So they're better off just keeping their phone and having a slightly better attitude, or be willing to work underneath the bar, because it's like, okay, now coach is on me for not squatting deep enough. Now coach is on me for positioning. Coach is on me now for also being on my cell phone. So it's just another thing to add on. So for me, I don't say no cell phones. I don't say any of that kind of stuff, but you can definitely tell when a kid's like, all right, I'm here to get better. They don't even bring their phone out on the gym floor. Yeah.
Well, and that being said, like everyone has like off days where focus drifts and stuff. You know, like maybe you're looking at your phone a little bit more than you would normally.
Yeah.
But it's about recognizing those moments and like coming back to your goals and being like, oh, I actually want to be here, but I've been kind of like messing around with my phone and whatnot. I need to like tighten up and actually do some lifts and do my thing. I think training in groups a lot of times can help with that, because you got other people that you're held accountable to. I think like good training partners are also kind of like a good tool for that.
Even sharing a platform.
Yeah,
that's another way.
You
come to think about it, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 6 platforms, and even if I only have like 3 or 4 people, like I'll start teaming them up together. Number one, to train them to communicate with other young athletes, because some of these athletes just won't talk to anyone.
Yeah.
Right. And, it's
and
like,
if you're messing around on your phone or whatnot, and like you got 2 other people waiting on you, they're gonna call your shit and be like, hey, let's go, let's do some work. I want to get home at some point.
But even then, if they want to get home, I still make them do more stuff.
That's fair.
2.5 hours here, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
But
so I think the overarching like kind of idea is that like where or what athletes should ask themselves is like, what is my intention? What do I want to accomplish? Where do I want to go with this? And there's no real wrong answer, but it's going to dictate not only the results that you get, but like how your sessions go and things like that too.
So in regards to those goals, since we're on that topic now, where should your goals lie? Like, should you have obviously a total overarching goal, and then a whole bunch of middle goals in between?
I think.
And what's the distance, kind of? You know what I mean? Like, are we talking like 1 month, 5 month?
I think
seasonal goal.
Most people like they have like a big goal in their mind, right? And that one's kind of easy because you can kind of daydream about it and like think about it and be like, oh yeah, man, it'd be great.
It would be great. X, Y, Z. Yeah.
I think where people really struggle, but their attention needs to lie, is on like the small actionables, right? And that's where like intention with a workout can be really good, or with a training session rather, is like you come in and the small goal for the day is, hey, I want my pull and the snatch to be fast. I want it to be accurate. I want it to be smooth, right?
Yeah.
Versus like just coming in and being like, man, I wish I could hit these numbers, but you know that's down the road, or it might happen, it might not happen. Now you have like a focused goal of like, okay, for day 3's training session, I'm going to come in and work on this, and that goal then builds into another and builds into another, and that's how you get like the middle goals and the larger goals and onward and upward.
Yeah, to get to the first floor, you still got to take a whole bunch of
So
steps.
I guess the answer to the question would be both, but I think the small actionable goals that build into stuff tend to be better in the long run.
And also, don't get so fixated on those goals that they end up taking you away from where your training takes you. So imagine if some guy wants to get better at the snatch and clean and jerk, and then due to his auxiliary lifts, clean pulls and back squats, and he does some overhead press, that he ends up being really strong in those. Do you think like people like, hey, maybe I shift to powerlifting, or maybe I shift to a federation that does overhead press, or maybe I do X, Y, Z? Like, do you think an adaptation like that is good, or will it long term continue to make you always change goals?
I mean, it can. I think it depends on the person.
Yeah.
Like if this person is getting stronger at their like presses, their squats, their deadlifts and stuff, like that's all good. But ultimately, they want to do weightlifting. You know, they need to, and all that stuff is fine. It has like a place.
Yeah.
But ultimately, they need to kind of bring it back around to the lifts, right, and actually practice the lifts. Now, if they start getting better, because like most people tend to like the stuff that they're good at.
Yeah, exactly.
Say they start getting better at like presses, pulls, squats, things like that, they end up, you know, being like, oh, powerlifting actually is pretty cool. Now your goal has changed, right?
Yep.
You're like, oh, I want to see where this goes. So I think like exploring some of those things is good, but it also, once again, kind of depends on what you ultimately want.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I've fallen into my own trap of that, and it's kind of why I asked the question, because I have experience in doing all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I started off doing like a lot of speed work and up at Fast NV in Reno, and it was more CrossFit,
Right.
speed work, HIIT training, and I just want to get in shape. And then I was like, oh, I'm kind of good at this CrossFit stuff, so I wanted to do CrossFit. And I did CrossFit for many years, and then it was like Casey showed up and he's like, hey, this cool thing is weightlifting, and you suck at it, but you could be good. And so I messed around with that, and then I realized that like my returns weren't as productive for me because I was still integrating a whole bunch of other stuff. And now I was just like, I just really want to get strong and see what happens. And now it's like I'm on that track, and it seems to be kind of, it fits in my daily life a little bit better, right? And I think that's another thing too, is if it fits better in your life, one thing versus the other, you might want to look at that and weigh those options too.
Well, and it comes back to like something that somebody said to me that like I think about a lot now, where it's like, you know, training is whatever you need it to be at that time, right?
Okay.
If you're a high school ball player, training is getting you stronger, faster for high school ball to go play in college and things like that. If you've been weightlifting for, you know, X amount of months after coming from speed work and stuff like that, but you're like, oh, I'm actually really kind of interested in these other things. Training can be whatever you need it to be.
Yeah.
And not only can it be whatever you need it to be, but if it's structured and it's directed and there's intention, like it can blossom into something that's like you get results and like actually gets better, right?
Yeah.
And I think even with like the small actionable goals, you can have something like call it like a tactical retreat, if you will. Where like say you've been working at a goal for like a couple months or whatever.
Okay.
Of like, oh, I want to be able to hit X number or whatever, which actually
in what, like a weightlifting?
in like a snatch or like
Okay.
a clean jerk or whatever. And I think that's a very common one where like, okay, my short-term goal is to hit X number, but you know what? It's not going in the time frame that you wanted it to go. I think there's nothing wrong with saying like, you know what? I'm going to take some time. I focused on this for a little bit. I'm going to divert my attention and focus on something else, like getting better at my positions, getting better at some of these things. I think kind of readjusting and adapting the goals, which is kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, a little bit.
Is useful so long as you don't kind of like lose the pie in the sky goal kind of thing.
Yeah, so like if you're heading in this direction and you still want to head in that direction, but you take a hard right and keep taking that way, like it's not going to be.
Well, and I think maybe a better example even is like maybe not X number, but it's like my goal is to max out every day because that's what I've heard gets you strong, and like I'm gonna take heavy singles and stuff. And like for some
if
people,
you're genetically gifted or both
on drugs.
on drugs.
Yeah. Well, and like it can work for some people, right? And like they get moderately strong in a short period of time.
Once again, it kind of falls into that training age comment earlier.
Totally.
Yeah.
But what happens if, like you've been doing it for a couple months and now you're not getting stronger at all? Or things like that. Like, do you just press forward because that's the goal? Or do you adapt the goal to the situation that's actually in front of you?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, do you adapt the goal, or do you adapt the goal or adapt the training? Because is the training, we're maxing out every day? Are you noticing that you're not getting injured and you're just in a small rut? Or is it like you're getting injured and maybe you need to change the training?
Well, I think it more depends on like, if my goal is get strong, my short-term goal is to employ a max out every day kind of program. But then suddenly that short-term goal and that short-term plan is no longer working.
Yeah.
Being able to adapt that goal and move in a different direction, I think is useful for people.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's also kind of like a lead into like being honest about your effort and training. Because imagine if you're trying to max out every day and you're giving it, and if you're honest about yourself and you're like, okay, I've really been giving 100% every time I go in and train, and I'm throttling down. And you say you're still not seeing that short-term goal come to fruition. Like maybe there needs to be a direction change. But if you're like, all right, I'm honestly given maybe 100% 2 of the days a week, you know what I mean? And I have 5 days of training. So 3 of those days, I'm really not giving a lot of effort. Maybe that's the direction change. Okay, I need to make sure if I'm training, it's 100%.
Or even something that happens more common is like, people get to an end of a program and they're like, oh man, I didn't get any results out of this, or I didn't get stronger, I didn't do whatever. Well, yeah, but you only hit 2 days out of the 5 that we do, or whatever. Or like, you only come in X amount of days and you've missed like a week or 5 of training or whatever. You can't expect, if you haven't followed the plan to at least like an 80% like efficiency or whatnot, like you can't expect to garner all of the results.
Yeah, you're not going to win a monopoly without buying buying land.
Pretty much.
Yeah, so I think that's generally the
kind of the thing that we've been thinking about this week.
Yeah, we've been thinking about that, and okay, so the second half of this is obviously we talked a little bit about, what was the comment that you said, paralysis through analysis?
Oh yeah, or a topic came up of there's a lot of discussion on like, and I think we can argue, or don't have to argue, that like good positions in lifts and things like that are like kind of a must-have.
Yes.
However, how close to endeavoring for like the ideal positions and the ideal whatnot, how close do you get to that before it starts to draw on you actually getting better? Meaning like, you perfection over progress kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where like I'm so focused on having perfect technique versus having safe, good technique and actually getting stronger or better or whatever.
So I kind of use this as a template for when I'm talking to some of the younger athletes and some of the adults. I'm like, hey, did you ever see your kids, because we work in baseball a lot, did you ever see your kids swing a bat for the first time? And they wrap themselves around and they fall on the ground, or when they really try, like first time they use a metal bat or a wood bat and it looks like they might hurt themselves. Do you tell them stop and not until you can swing perfectly? But they need to swing in order to get better at practice, to do the thing that kind of might seem dangerous in the beginning, right?
Well, and I think once the initial kind of things are in place, like learning how to brace, learning how to organize yourself so that you're in good positions and things like that.
The old low-hanging fruit, huh?
Yeah, and like, yeah, definitely. And like, but after that, it's like, we need to strengthen those positions and keep moving forward if possible.
Yeah.
Because like, ultimately, like, if someone's still moving a barbell around and not adding any weight and like trying to strive for this perfect form, what happens when they do add weight and suddenly everything breaks down? Do you start over?
Yeah, you always go back to the bar no matter.
Right.
Every time that you load weight, you'll probably look a little bit worse.
Right. I think for like most skill acquisition, you have to go through like a period of like, okay, this isn't 100% perfect, but I'm moving in a correct direction, and
That's
only after
getting baby deer phase.
Yeah, and the only way you get out of that is getting reps in.
Yeah.
And getting practice.
Baby deers only learn to walk by walking.
Mm-hmm. There seems to be like this kind of this through line through like the fitness industry and like strength and conditioning that like if it's not perfect, you're gonna get hurt.
Yep.
And I think for bad positions, that is absolutely true. Bad, unsafe positions, that's absolutely true.
Yep.
But I don't think they have to be 100% perfect before trying to move forward or make progress.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, I kind of always use this as like my deadlift form.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, once it gets to a certain point, starts to get a little too dynamic through the lumbar, right?
Yeah.
But in the same sense, I know my body, and I've been training long enough to know that, like, hey, I can push my body X amount of distance without getting hurt, and I'm sure that's going to change over at my aging. OT.
Gets you every time.
Gets me every time. So I kind of have a baseline, but when I watch these youths and they might do it a little bit, and I'm like, so how did that feel? Oh, I felt the round back. Well, without getting to a bad position, you don't know what the bad positions are yet, right? So you need a little bit of both. And on top of that, you can go as cliche as movements in the real world aren't perfect, right? You can do all that kind of stuff.
Or the people throw out the line of like, well, a PR is not always going to look beautiful.
Yeah.
Like your maximal lift's not always going to look beautiful. And that's true. I think people lean on that a little too hard.
Yeah.
Where like it's like an excuse for like
80% shouldn't look like junk either.
yeah, like it's like an excuse for dog shit. But it's like at the same time, you know, like you said, like how are you going to know what a bad position feels like? But it's about learning how to feel those things not under a 90% load.
Yes, exactly. You know? I mean, if you start hitting bad positions, even if your training age is really old, like I hit some bad positions today in deadlifts at 80%. Not a good day. Maybe I back down a little bit, hit some positions, and build back up, see if I can fix it.
Now, for someone who's been training as long as you have, like having the awareness to do that might be lost on like a new lifter, like a new athlete, you know what I mean? But
that's where coaching comes in, right?
Right.
A lot of athletes that go into the gym, oh yeah, the I've heard this before. Going to the gym is really, you know, hurt my son or hurt my husband, and so like we're a little afraid of it. I'm like, well, that's what a coach is there for, to guide them. Having a kid just run off, or a young man run off and just try to lift what Men's Health is telling them to lift with no guidance, always a disaster.
I think sorry.
He's in trouble.
Yeah, very much.
Sorry, Kate.
We can edit this out.
We're gonna take a break. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, just in case. Where were we?
Perfect form that I have.
Younger athletes, kind of building that awareness of like how far is too far and things like that. And you only get some of that awareness by having reps under your belt, okay?
Yep. Trying
to get good positions, trying to get into where you're supposed to get, trying to get the bar where it needs to go, things like that. You end up, you know, kind of working through like, okay, this is right, and after only like, you know, X amount of reps, then it starts looking good and better, and you can start adding weight and like challenging those positions.
Yep.
I think what people lose when they try to like stay as perfect as possible is like it then never gets challenged. So then when you do try to build up weight and those positions are challenged, you make lifts and actually make them, or you end up not being able to hold positions because you've never practiced adding weight and progressing.
Yeah. You know, you don't start off driving going 100 miles, or the speed limit on a freeway, 75 miles an hour. You go 25 miles an hour and you build up to 35, and it might be terrifying. Mm-hmm. And you might panic a couple times and slam the brakes too fast or go too fast or whatever it is. But eventually you gain a comfortability in that position of driving 35 and 45, and you build up, right? Unless you're a psycho and you're just like, all right, freeway it is.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like any skill, right? And actually, I think this speaks to both topics. Where like, if you're trying to learn to play the violin or whatever, you're gonna have a structured plan in place of like, okay, I'm gonna practice this. I'm gonna practice where my fingers go. I'm gonna practice how like the bowstring's supposed to go and things like that. And as you endeavor to like get better and better, you're gonna have some bad notes, some bad this and bad that, but it shouldn't stop you from playing to where you're like, oh man, I gotta go back to a ukulele or like whatever.
It's gotta be perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So,
It's gotta be perfect.
Yeah.
Ukulele.
And I think it's one of those things where like sometimes like maybe when we're in like the gym atmosphere, the idea of like learning a skill is lost on people. Quite a bit. Because like and it's fair because they're like, oh, I want to get stronger. I have these other goals.
Yep.
But you also have to acquire the skills to get there too.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to build a house without learning how to swing a hammer first.
That's a good one. I would have gone the other direction and said foundation, but I mean, I like the hammer.
You wouldn't learn how to build a house without a flamethrower. You know what I'm saying? So.
Burn it down. Just burn it down. Just start over. It wasn't perfect.
Pretty much. I'm gonna go back to building bungalows the way I fucked up.
Oh, cardboard box. Yeah, I think that's probably kind of where.
Those were kind of the topics that came up this week of like, or like the bigger topics, like not training specific, but it's like those things that are on the outside of training that affect training in a weird way.
Yeah. And also, I guess it can go the opposite direction, right? So we're not saying like with shitty form max out, but in an atmosphere that which you're in a group setting with your buddies and you might want to ego lift, right? And you're like throwing on weight that you might not be able to handle. Like you got to have that mentality too of like, hey, this probably isn't a good idea. Like,
and it's like everything else in life where like it falls not on an extreme or in like an absolute. It falls kind of somewhere in the middle where it's like, okay, like yes, my form should be as good as it possibly can be. But I should also be aware that if I get in a bad position, I can either get myself out of it, or take that moment to be like self-aware and be like, okay, maybe I need to back down to X or do something different because now the wheels are completely coming off or whatever. I think like a lot of people, especially in like an internet style discussion, they end up in this place where it's like it's either everything or it's nothing. Yeah. It's either perfect or it's not. And I think it doesn't leave a whole lot of room for people to learn and get better.
Well, I literally watched a video today of Zach, how do you say his last name? Tellender?
Oh, yeah.
He was talking about Squat University, right? And he was like, okay, the reason he's posting this absolute statement is not because he truly believes this absolute statement, but it gets the information.
Yeah.
It gets the algorithm to throw that out there more often.
Yeah.
And then if you look into his, like, he further discusses what he's trying to say in his posts, right?
I think that
but also there's kind of a give and take, right? Because he rides the other line a little bit.
Totally. Well, and I think but it's like, I think that speaks to more of like a responsibility for your platform kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where it's like, yes, like I can make an absolute statement and get like a bunch of views and a bunch of likes and stuff, and then put whatever I want to say into like the caption or whatever. How many people read the captions?
Well, and I think that was actually Zach's point. It was like, he was like, I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to get more information out there, but the actual information, the good information that's useful is in this thing that no one reads.
That no one reads.
Yeah. And then obviously he's he makes fun. He's like, and then all the comments are like hating on him, and he gets so much hate. But I'm not gonna lie, like a lot of these kids that we work with, if they, as inexperienced lifters, look at that and they're like, that might help me with my positions. Maybe if I try a little bit.
Well, and that's where it's valuable, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's how everybody gets information out, for the most part. And good, bad, or indifferent. But it's
not
like,
watching some MLP podcast.
Yeah. No, this is for entertainment.
This is just for you and
this
me.
Is
really.
For us. No, but it's like that's how people get their information now, and because it is like that. I mean, Squat University has like more followers than you and I.
1.9 million or something like that,
which is fine. But and he can conduct himself however he wants to. But it's also one of those things of like, okay, like if you really want that other information out, maybe you should start putting that out there.
That's true. I mean, he's already got enough followers to where like you're gonna get so many likes, you're gonna get so many that. Like the information should start being truthful. Like I guess like where's the integrity line? Like you're gonna throw out so much divisive information, right? And just throw it out there and be like, all right, bring me the followers, and then start posting stuff that's more factual.
And it's probably not even as like
or less black and white, right? More gray area.
Well, and it's not even as like malicious as that either.
Where, yeah, that's true.
You know, like I doubt he had a plan of like he's like, no, I'm just gonna put out this stuff and like see what happens.
Catfish all of you.
Well, and I think like ultimately, like, especially if you're in like that position,
Yeah.
like you need to ask yourself, do you want to, what is your goal? Do you want to help and teach people, or do you want to be a part of an internet discussion and potentially create controversy or whatever?
Yeah, and I don't think he's there. I mean, I think he really wants to help people, because honestly, I've taken some things from there and been like, oh, all right, that helps. And I've honestly used it on some clients to be like, okay, that's actually helped with back pain or whatever it is.
Well, and I think that's the absolute thing again too. Where
Yeah.
like when you look at his post and you go like, oh man, I'm not close to this guy. This guy's full of shit. Like I'm not gonna do this. Or you're like, oh man, he's the best. Like I'm not gonna listen to anybody else. You're missing kind of the point, and you're missing a lot of good information on the periphery where it's like, you know, maybe he's got some good information and you can take those tools and use them, and then get tools and ideas from other people too, and get inspiration or whatever, versus being like, oh no, he's full of shit, and like writing it off.
Yeah, well, there's that same black and white thing again. Well, it brings me to another point of when I was going through ball sports stuff, right? Every coach would be like, hey, you're going to take something from me that you're going to really like and you're going to hate some things. And then the next coach is going to fill in the gaps, and the next coach is going to fill in, and you take the best of every coach that you've ever had. And then you're just full of information, quality information, and then you remember some of that bad stuff that then maybe applies at some point. Like, if you can take and just absorb everything like a sponge, whether it's good, bad, indifferent, it's probably going to make you a better athlete in general.
I think where people get hung up with the internet stuff specifically is like you can't even tell what is true and what's not, right? So like say if you're like
readily available actual studies and information is like almost impossible to come by.
Or
everything
even,
is pretty biased.
Or even verifying if anybody is like even qualified to be talking about whatever they're talking about.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the you know, it's one of those things where like people get up in arms where it's like, yeah, like how do I know Spot University is not just doing this for the followers or doing this for whatever? I don't think he is.
No.
But like, how would you know?
Yeah,
and
that's true.
That's kind of where the detractors kind of come from too.
And there's a little bit of that everything. You don't ever see like true information, and everyone's just like, oh wow, that is actual fact. Everyone agrees on it.
Right. Or even like people present
like even that the Earth is round. Like,
it's true.
You know, like even on that absolute fact, people still think the Earth is flat.
Well, and training's no different.
It's probably even more. I mean,
well, and the funny part about training is like everything's been the same for like 50 years, essentially.
For quite a while.
Yeah.
I mean,
50, 70 years.
General, principles haven't really changed too much. I mean, so Zach, apparently I've just been binging on Zach Salinger, was talking with Brett Fikowski about why CrossFit, which people think is like this brand new thing, this brand new sport, is around, and it's like innovative, right? Like none of those movements were really invented outside of maybe the thruster, which is basically a squat and a jerk, just at a light weight in one movement. Like it's generally like you're combining a whole bunch of already made movements.
Right.
And it's technically CrossFit's a brand, and that's why they can't actually have normal sport drug testing. Yeah, so that's why they don't use USADA.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. They're not a governing body.
Yep, because they're a brand, not a sport.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Whatever, he mentioned some people in Switzerland, whoever.
Who do you testing for them? Or?
No, who dictate what's a sport and what's not.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Like that one sport where they play soccer volleyball, where they like kick it in the air and they're like doing the splits and they kick it over the net. You never seen that?
I've never seen that.
Oh, it's ridiculous. It's like it's extreme hacky sack.
I know.
It's actually I enjoy watching it. I don't know what's going on. Kind of like rugby and cricket, but
it's been dictated that it is a sport.
It is a sport.
Whatever you think of it, it is a sport.
Well, and that's the thing. You know, however CrossFit needs to become a sport, which I think at this point it's definitive that it is, right?
Or alternatively, does CrossFit HQ just go like, we make enough money on our own, we're fine.
Yeah, we're fine.
This is fine.
Well, everyone wants to talk about like drug testing. Like honestly, like I don't care. Like, if you want to roid up and try to beat Matt Frazier, be my guest.
Right.
I still think you're gonna lose.
Totally. But yeah, no, where were you going with the CrossFit thing?
Oh, we were just talking about what were we talking about? Sport.
It's time for questions.
Yeah. All right. So we got some questions.
All right, let's see. All right.
I'm gonna go back and edit this, and I'm gonna be like, oh, I know, I was going with this.
Messed it up. All right. So we got some questions here that were posted to the Instagram from the members, from our followers, and we got Emily in the gym here who asked us, "What's better, kilos or pounds, and why?"
They're the same.
Definitely the same.
They're the
However, metal plates are definitely heavier than rubber plates.
Oh yeah, that's just science.
Yeah, of course.
And they take more fingers too.
I think a pound of feathers is also heavier too, technically.
But I think what M's really going for is, why doesn't the United States use kilos, right? You know what I mean? Like, metric system.
It's because we got some good pride.
Right? We got freedom units.
We invented it, we're going to keep it.
We're going to keep it. But yeah, so in most of the strength sport, they use kilos actually outside of CrossFit. CrossFit uses pounds still.
Yeah.
And so most of the strength sports use kilos, so that's why we have kilos.
Does strongman use pounds or kilos?
They use
Whatever.
multiple metrics.
Yeah.
I mean, at CrossFit at one point used stone as a especially when they were talking about swinging kettlebells.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh. That's how very UK of them.
I know, which was kind of weird because you got to think like they're barbells in pounds, but they're using stone. Like,
Weird.
they just use pounds. I don't know.
Yeah. Moral of the story is they're the same.
They're the same generally.
We got another question from Maddie that says, and this is pretty good, and I think it kind of tangentially related to what we were talking about, but
Whatever that word is.
What's more important, motivation or consistency?
So actually, I will defer to Casey on this. Casey wrote this up one time, and he got a quote from someone, I forgot who it was from.
Mm-hmm.
But he says, motivation is fleeting, right? It can pass, it can come and go as it pleases. And I think that's huge, because it's like when you're motivated in the gym and consistent, those days that you're motivated are really good, 100%, get a lot of work in days. But if you aren't motivated and you're not consistent, you're just not gonna, you will miss weeks at a time, right? And that's kind of where the consistency factor is. Basically, this is a habit at this point, to where people come at a certain time, they work out with the same people, their goal is generally the same as a group, and that's the consistency that they get to thrive off of and see real gains. And I think that breeds motivation, right? So like the fleeting motivation, if you tame it, you can have it all the time, but it doesn't come without consistency.
Well, and I think it's always interesting that they get lumped together a lot. Like, or like the argument's always motivation or consistency or this or that. I think they're two separate things personally. Where like I think motivation, inspiration are like things that come up psychologically while you're doing whatever you're endeavoring to do, right?
Gotcha, yeah.
So like you might become a music example. Like you might
Goddamn violent.
right? You might like become inspired by like something that you hear, which gives you motivation to then go and try to either replicate it or do something new or whatever. Consistency, I think, falls more along the lines of discipline.
Okay.
Where like I think discipline and consistency are more closer linked than motivation and consistency. Where it's like to be consistent, you have to have the discipline in place. And the discipline comes from you saying like, I want to accomplish this thing, and in order to do that, I need to do X repeatedly for like a long period of time,
Yep.
and make sure that I stay with that. And motivation can help with discipline in that like, I feel good today, I'm going to go into the gym and I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do and
Yeah.
things like that, and try to crush the workout, or the training session. And it can help aid that consistency, but I think they're on different
planes. Okay, that makes sense.
We got a question from Mr. Kenny. He says, "Who's the best athlete you have worked with?"
Tim.
Without a doubt. Next question.
No, it's hard to gauge because obviously I work with quite a few different ball sport athletes. I've had a hockey player in here that was crazy athletic. I had obviously a really good baseball player in here recently, Daniel Susak. His brother was in here. There's been a couple football players who probably going to get scholarships that have been in here. And it's hard to gauge, right? Because they're all different. I've had guys that are super unathletic, but I thoroughly enjoy them every second that they're here, and I think that's a big thing too. So it's hard to say, Kenny, you're athletic, but Ben is still stronger than you. Just so you know.
That's
yeah, that's a fact. But yeah, as in regards to the most successful, I think the only one earning money that I've ever trained is Andrew Susak at this point. Scott Randall is, I think, just got signed by the A's, I think. Good for him. So I think those are some of the guys that have, on paper, been currently the most successful.
Well, and I think.
Well, and obviously Connor, but that's more Casey. Casey and.
I've been around some pretty good athletes.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen Hampton Morris train. Who's I think he's a 67 kilo weightlifter now, and
kind of strong.
Yeah, and he's very strong. And he does things that are like boggle the mind, where you're like, holy shit! Like I can't even like believe somebody would be that strong.
Yeah.
At that size, that kid's gonna go places, and he's doing some cool stuff. So I've been like around, and Connor.
Yeah,
Connor too.
I mean Connor does things like that all the time.
Yeah, and like it's one of those things of like, I guess like kind of a related question, or like a B side of the question is like, would you rather have a talented athlete or someone who is maybe moderately athletic but is consistent and consistent and puts in work, but maybe they don't have as much talent necessarily?
Yeah. So the talent part, obviously, like kind of with some of those athletes that we already mentioned, like they'd be really good athletes if they just sat themselves in their bedroom, did push-ups and air squats. Like they'd be really good at their sport because there's so much skill involved in some of that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the consistent athlete and the one that puts in a ton of work is the most fun for me to watch and most fun for me to like.
It's the most rewarding.
Yes, exactly. And so that's it's, with Kenny's question, it's one of those where it's like some of the best athletes also have some of the best personalities, and some of the not so good athletes kind of had a bad personality. So there's kind of a mix too, right?
Yeah. Well, I think like it's another kind of absolute thing. Like you can't say one way or another. This person, like you can say like, oh, they're a pretty good athlete, they're this, they're that, but it's like combinations of the two.
Yeah.
Where like the elite of the elite are people who are like talented and also have this discipline and consistency and work ethic kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm just sitting here, like a lot of the young baseball players that I've had that they've tried out other programs too, but watching them grow from when they're like these small little, not before puberty, young boys, and then they're growing up, and all of a sudden they're signing, like Caden Thompson just signed to Santa Clara, and Jackson Bird just signed, and these guys are freak athletes and they work hard. Yeah. Isaac Hawthorne's on the same boat as all those guys. We're like freaks of nature. They came in here, they worked their butt off, and it doesn't take much for them to like really just blossom, right? And so it's fun to watch that
and get better
and generally they had a good attitude too. Obviously it's like having them come in, it's like, oh yeah, all right, here comes Isaac, or oh yeah, here comes Caden, you know what I mean? It's fun.
Well, and I think the flip side of it too, like I think a lot of people can point to or think about either teammates that they've had or like people that they know where like they have like bucket loads of talent, or like they're like extremely talented,
but you see them walk up and you're like,
well, or they don't do anything.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like you can be the best wrestler in the world. How do you know if you never step foot on a mat or go to a practice?
Yeah.
You know, like it's.
You gotta put yourself out there a little bit.
I think like when most coaches look back on like the best athletes that they've kind of worked with or like spent time with or whatever, is like they go to two different places. They go to like results that they garnered, but also like the work and the ethic that they put in.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah. It's not necessarily like the most successful, like, oh, I coached, I don't know why Dustin Pedroia came in. I didn't coach him. He just, if I was a coach and I coached him at one point, like, oh yeah, I coached Dustin Pedroia. It's probably like that 2 or 3 kids that ended up growing up and not playing that sport, but they're like, oh, it was fun coaching them. You know what I mean? I don't know. Like, it goes along with your same point.
Okay. So another question here we got from Josh, and he says, how much can a bench bench? If a bench could bench,
how much
a bench? Yeah. How much does a bench bitch?
Sneak that one in there.
I don't know.
Whatever's on the bar plus the human.
Oh, hey.
There you go.
So technically, do all benches have world records?
Every bench owns
Yeah.
a world record.
The person doing the benching doesn't own the record, it's the benching.
It's the bench itself. Has the bench ever failed?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the gray one over there has.
Has
And I
failed.
bet you there's a couple of people here who's like, I know that bench. I've fallen on that
Yeah.
bench. There's video of that.
It has failed me,
It has-
personally. Of course.
And it's still here because I refuse. That will be here. It's a staple.
You gotta learn about failure.
Yeah.
At some point. Whether it's the bench's fault or your fault, you gotta learn.
Danger only makes you stronger.
All right. Next question. So who's that?
Oh, that's Gage.
Okay.
Philip Gash.
Right on. He asks, do you have a checklist you go through before a lift or movement?
I would say I actually had a conversation with some kids earlier today. There's when it comes to music, right? So kind of like a pre-lift. A lot of people are like, oh, give me some amped up music. And I'm like, I'm not necessarily that person. I'm a person that I like the music that I have an emotional connection to, whether it be slow, like Zach Brown Band, Highway 20 Ride. If you guys ever happen to play that, you'd be like, how can anyone lift to this song? But I can't. I have an emotional connection to it. It's one of those songs that really can stir up some mental fortitude, right? Some strength.
Whatever you need for that moment.
Whatever I need for that moment. And then outside of that, the actual physical checklist, making sure I feel good under the bar before I lift it off, making sure my feet are really stable, and make sure I fill up and have that good intra-abdominal pressure.
I think, actually, for a long time, I did have a checklist of I think I had a rule of okay, you could only think about 2 or 3 cues before you approach the bar, and that's it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the things I was working on or whatever. I think less about those checklists now, more because it's become habit.
Gotcha. Okay.
To where it happens regardless of if I'm thinking about it or not. As I approach a lift or I'm starting a lift or whatever.
Yeah, I think that falls into a good category. Younger lifters probably need more aggressive checklists off the beginning, some of the basic stuff, and then as your training age goes up, it could be more isolated to something that is faulty in your positioning, and then eventually, hopefully, the goal is you get to that point where there's no longer a need to necessarily think about it outside of
or it's
the goal of the movement.
Well, and it kind of speaks to this acquiring a skill kind of idea that we've been talking about, where I think I heard it put once, can't exactly remember where, so I can't quote who it was, but the idea is that you move from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence to unconscious competence, which is the final stage of automated, and then conscious competence. So the idea is if you're unconsciously incompetent, you're bad and you don't even know you're bad.
Okay.
If you're consciously incompetent,
That's a lot of people driving.
yeah, some lifters. If you're consciously incompetent, you know you're bad, and you know why you're bad, but you haven't fixed it yet. You haven't had enough time to practice and get better. If you're consciously competent, you know how to execute. You know what you need to do to execute, and maybe 1 or 2 are kind of here or there or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you're unconsciously competent, not only can you execute, but you don't have to think about it either, or at least focus on it in as much. And so I think sometimes when you watch people who have been doing something for a very long time, lifting, or any sort of ball sport or whatever, and things like that, when people reach unconscious competence is they are those are the people that you see that are really proficient in what they're doing.
Yeah.
They make it look flawless kind of thing.
I've kind of said this before, but watching hockey players play,
Mm-hmm.
man, I can't even stand on skates, and they're picking up their puck and putting it between their legs and finding the corners of the goal. That is wild, and I think that falls into exactly what you're talking about. It's I'm incompetent because I don't know what I'm doing bad on skates, so
right.
I'm at the beginning level.
Yeah, unconsciously incompetent.
Unconsciously incompetent.
You throw on a pair of skates and you're I don't know what I can do to fix this. I just know it's not good.
It's not good.
And then at least coming back to the checklist idea, this is something that I've even implemented in work life or whatever, but I think having systems is good. So if you approach a bar and you're okay, every time I approach a bar, I position my feet, I grab the bar, I take in air, I tighten down, and things like that. If you have a system in place, that you do over and over again, and you get better and better at it, and you refine it over time, you end up freeing up other kind of mental space to focus on other things.
Okay.
Because if the system's in place, and that happens every single time, you can think about other stuff like, okay, I really need to, pull aggressively on this one, or I need to do whatever, because your checklist is already in place and you practice it enough that it's no longer a problem.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, I think this is our last question. Who's that?
Oh, the Gerb 21, John Bonificacni.
Oh, okay, there you go.
John
How
Bon.
do I get bigger shoulders is what John asked.
For John specifically, he actually needs to work out.
Oh. That'll do it, that'll help.
He's got 19 kids and he's working all the time.
I was going to say, go back in time, find new parents, and acquire some genetics.
Yeah, no. So we kind of talked about this before the podcast, and a lot of it has to do with obviously genetics, but a lot of it has to do with it's a small muscle group, right? Requiring not as much CNS stress, and you said a lot less surface, right?
Yeah, or it's like
Less area.
Or it can recover from a larger amount of work
Yep.
because of how small the muscle group is, right?
Yeah.
So like you can probably, and depending on people's shoulders and depending on like shoulder like history or whatever, like
Yeah.
injuries and things like that, like people can work out their shoulders a little bit more frequently than they realize.
Yep.
And not incur as much damage as you would if you tried to train legs quite as much or like back or
do the amount of repetitions and the volume.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. Like the workload.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of those where it depends on what you're doing. Like if you're throwing a baseball 1,000 times every day, I think you're getting a lot of work, but you probably need to back off on that and add something else. Just for my baseball boys, I know they throw a lot, and they want to get bigger, stronger shoulders, and sometimes it's going to require you to take some away from somewhere else and apply it here.
Well, I think you get into like the idea of like a repetitive stress injury kind of thing.
Yep.
Like if you're doing the same movement over and over again, that's going to be causing a problem. But if you're like coming in doing ISOISTs, you're doing dumbbell shoulder press, like, and like not only that, like muscles grow and get bigger from a variety of kind of movements,
Yep.
which helps. I also think they get bigger, and most muscles get bigger through accumulated tension.
Yep.
So like if you see like a gymnast who does like rings and things like that, gigantic arms, gigantic forearms, huge shoulders, because like the amount of tension that they go through on like a daily basis for those areas, the muscle has to adapt and keep up with it.
Yep.
And they're able to kind of train it frequently enough that suddenly they start putting on size and things of that nature too.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, they want big shoulders and they think that lifting big weights is going to do that. Most of the shoulder work that I find gets a lot of growth is kind of the high repetition, right?
Yeah.
Generally. For obviously size reasons, like if it's not burning, it's not going to grow. Yeah. And we can be as generic as that because we don't want to talk about intensity and load and volume and get too deep into it. But
right.
Generally for growth, it's going to need to burn quite a bit.
Yeah. Hypertrophy is like, or like muscle growth is like one of those things that like lends itself to kind of higher repetitions and things like that. If you want stronger shoulders, heavier lifting into like some of your presses, some of your push presses, jerks and things like that are probably going to be a little bit better of a route for you.
Yeah, and so that's going to take us into probably a whole new black hole of strength versus hypertrophy. But yeah, so in generally, bigger shoulders are just going to require more accumulation of work throughout different movements over I would say generally a week period.
Yeah.
And then kind of reset that.
Well, and I think at least as far as like how often do you train them, like, and it can be specific to each individual, but starting with like a twice a week and then seeing how that goes, seeing like general kind of soreness, if you're like, oh man, I could probably like handle like another day.
Yeah.
Like slowly, incrementally adding will help you kind of not get into the realm of like, okay, now I feel like shit.
Yeah. Well, and that question goes a long way in regards to some of the questions I got recently because we've had the CrossFit Games or Rogue Invitational on in the background. Like, how do these guys do so many workouts in a day? Well, I'm like, they just didn't start one day.
Yeah.
They have built a base over a long period of time of doing 5 training sessions a week, and then it went to 7, and then they started adding in double days, and it went to 10, and then they figured out that like some of those training sessions need to be a little bit lighter load, and then they could add 12. And so that's how they've adapted their body to that over many years. Because if you look at how the CrossFit Games were, the first ones in 2006, 2007?
Yes.
Yeah, something like that. It was literally only like one weekend period, and it was like 4 workouts. Now it's a full week period, and it's like 18 workouts.
Well, and that like that's more of like a sport adapting to like its athlete based kind of thing. Where like as you get like higher level athletes, you need to start creating different challenges for them and things like that.
Yeah,
it starts to expand.
Hit all facets of business.
But it is kind of a weird thought process where like if it's training or strength or anything really, like there seems to be this idea that like suddenly people just like are good at stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, like even like I don't doubt that there's like prodigies out there where they're like really adept at like something.
Yeah.
But even they have to work at it to a certain
It's
extent.
not just gonna happen once
Yeah.
again.
It might be easier.
Without
but, like,
without doing any CrossFit movements, a guy's just not gonna make it to the CrossFit Games.
for real. Yeah. Like if you've never done a burpee, you're gonna have a really hard time.
Yep. Well, I get that comment a lot too from people's wives, mothers, fathers, people I meet. Like, oh, I can't do what you do, and it's like, well, yeah. I mean, I've been consistently working out for generally 10 years, trying to eat right for 10 years, working on sleep and all this kind of stuff, and I go through follies, but generally my consistent 10-year look has been the gym.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, like, it's like, yeah, you're right. Year 10, Chris, you can't do or keep up with or whatever. However, what year 1 Chris was doing, you probably could keep up with.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And would get better and like start to improve and things like that.
Well, even let's put it even year 7 Chris can't keep up with year 10 Chris.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
generally right now in strength work, like not even close. I'm 150 pounds behind in year 7 Chris on my back squat purely.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that's like it's a many year over time build. And so back to our original question.
Yeah.
That's how you generally start working shoulders more. Is you start with 2, and then see how you feel working to 3, working to 4.
Like,
and then,
like anything else, start slow, kind of build incrementally, and then you'll be able to find like a good sweet spot.
Yep.
Do we want to give like favorite kind of shoulder exercises maybe? To kind of button that up too?
Yeah. So I really thoroughly enjoy lateral raises. Actually, one of my clients brought it to me, and he was like, yeah, on my heavier shoulder press day, he obviously likes to press, and then just because the CNS stress is already fairly high, he goes heavy lateral raises, but he only lifts them out maybe about this far, and he keeps them from banging on the quads, and he keeps this short range of motion right here at
Just
like
lots of tension.
lots of tension with like 25 to 35 pounds. So you start lifting up here and you get a little stress on your shoulder. This shouldn't hurt you, and if it does, there's something wrong. But so if you're in this range of motion and you're doing 30 in a row without stopping the movement, man, it thrashes them. It makes them burn really bad, and it doesn't cause a lot of damage. You're not really doing that much of range of motion to cause that much damage.
I think I'm a more meat and potatoes kind of person.
Yeah.
I think like the best shoulder builder I've ever experienced is like a barbell overhead press. And I know we were saying like strength and this and that, but like if you do it in like a 10 to 12 range or whatnot, like you're building some serious size there, and potentially building some strength as well.
Yeah. Double-edged sword right there, or you're gonna get cut either way.
Yeah, totally.
All right.
Cool.
I think that's good.
Podcast.
Peace out.